I had never thought of myself as a jealous husband. Trust, after all, was the foundation of my marriage to Clara. Or so I thought. It was one evening, a mundane Tuesday after work, that my world began to unravel. Sitting at the bar with a colleague, David, I couldn't help but overhear his drunken stories about risk and thrill. "You know," he slurred, "there's nothing like sneaking around with someone forbidden, especially when they're married." I chuckled awkwardly, dismissing his bravado as bar talk. But that comment gnawed at me. Not because I thought it was true, but because something inside me whispered, "Pay attention." Clara had been distant lately. I brushed it off as stress from her new morning yoga routine and her early errands that took her out the door before dawn. She'd laugh off my concerns. "Just errands," she'd say. I believed her because I wanted to. But the nights alone began to pile up. She'd head to bed early, leaving her phone locked and notifications muted. Innocuous? Sure. But David's words stuck like a splinter. Curiosity turned to doubt. Was she really going to the gym every morning? Or was there something more? One morning, I pretended to sleep in but slipped out after she left. Her car's tail lights disappeared down the road, not in the direction of her yoga studio but toward the affluent part of town. Specifically, near my Uncle Marcus's estate. Marcus was a man of excess, a self-made millionaire who loved flaunting his wealth, women, and charm. He was notorious for his indulgent parties, where discretion was never the rule. I couldn't shake the unease in my gut. Why was Clara heading there? The following week, I installed a GPS tracker on her car. My heart sank as I confirmed what I feared. Every morning, she went to Marcus's mansion. No detours. No stops. The pattern was unmistakable. When I finally confronted her, I expected denial. But her tears and silence told me everything I needed to know. "I didn't want to hurt you," she murmured. But she had. Betrayal is a funny thing. It eats at you, turns love into anger, trust into suspicion. As I stared at her tear-streaked face, a plan began forming in my mind. Marcus might be rich and powerful, but I had dirt on him, secrets that could destroy his empire. Clara's betrayal was the match, but the fire? That would be my revenge. After Clara's confession, I was consumed by a fury I couldn't contain. She had admitted to the affair, but not to the depths of it. "It wasn't serious," she insisted. "It just happened." But things like this don't just happen. Marcus, my uncle, was no saint. The family whispered about his scandals, his revolving door of women, and the shady deals that padded his millions. He had always been the charming rogue, the black sheep who made good but left everyone feeling uneasy in his presence. I never thought he'd turn his sights on my wife. That night I didn't sleep. Instead, I dug into every corner of Marcus's life that I could access. For years, I'd ignored his excesses, dismissed his smug smile at family gatherings, and politely declined his offers to join his ventures. Now, I wanted to know everything. The next morning, Clara left for her usual errands, and I followed her. This time, I wasn't subtle. My car crept along behind hers as she drove to Marcus's estate. She didn't even hesitate at the gates. They opened for her like she was a regular. I waited outside, my pulse pounding. I wanted to storm in, to confront them both, but I held back. A scene wouldn't satisfy the anger boiling inside me. I needed more proof, leverage, the kind of ammunition that would ensure they paid. Hours passed before Clara finally emerged. Her hair was disheveled, her face flushed. She glanced around nervously before getting into her car and speeding off. I didn't follow her this time. Instead, I drove to a friend of mine, Victor, who worked in private investigations. "Ryan, what's this about?" Victor asked, raising an eyebrow as I handed him a photo of Marcus and Clara together from a family gathering. "I need you to dig into both of them," I said, my voice tight. "Anything you can find, financial records, personal contacts, habits. Leave no stone unturned." Victor hesitated. "This isn't like you." "Just do it," I snapped. For the next week, I lived in a haze of anger and anticipation. Clara acted like nothing was wrong, like we could just move on. She cooked dinner, kissed me goodnight, even suggested we take a weekend trip to reconnect. I played along, biding my time. Victor came through faster than I expected. One evening, he called me to his office, where he laid out folders and photos like a macabre buffet. "Your uncle," he began, "is involved in more than just infidelity." The evidence was staggering. Marcus wasn't just wealthy, he was crooked. There were records of bribes, tax evasion, and an off-the-books account that funded some very illegal activities. And then there were the photos, Marcus with various women, including Clara, entering and leaving his mansion. But the piece de resistance? Clara wasn't the only married woman Marcus was entertaining. He had a whole roster of them, complete with detailed schedules and private notes. "He's a predator," Victor said grimly. The discovery felt like a gut punch, but it also ignited a new fire within me. Marcus wasn't invincible, and now I had the means to prove it. I wasn't just going to expose Clara and Marcus. I was going to dismantle them both piece by piece. As I stared at the damning evidence, a plan began to form in my mind. It wasn't enough to confront them. I needed to strip away everything they valued, their power, their image, their lives as they knew them. This wasn't just revenge. It was justice. I spent the next few days crafting my plan with a meticulousness I didn't know I possessed. Clara's betrayal was personal, but Marcus's offenses extended far beyond that. If I played this right, I wouldn't just get even, I'd destroy Marcus's empire and ensure Clara faced the fallout of her choices. The first step was gathering more leverage. Victor had already unearthed plenty, but I needed details that would tighten the noose. I started by visiting Marcus's mansion. Not openly, of course. I wasn't ready for a confrontation yet. Instead, I parked a block away and watched. It didn't take long to see Marcus's pattern. Every morning, Clara wasn't the only visitor. Expensive cars rolled up to the gates, women who looked like they belonged on magazine covers, men in tailored suits who stayed for hours, and delivery trucks that clearly weren't bringing groceries. The place was a hub for something bigger than I had imagined. One night, under the cover of darkness, I snuck onto the property. I knew the estate well from family functions, and Marcus's arrogance meant he wasn't big on security. A few discreetly placed cameras, yes, but no guards. I avoided the cameras, my heart pounding in my chest as I crept toward the guest house where Marcus conducted most of his business. The place was a treasure trove. Inside, I found a safe tucked behind a painting, a classic move for someone who thought he was untouchable. I didn't try to open it. I wasn't here to leave traces. Instead, I snapped photos of the room, the safe, and a ledger carelessly left on the desk. The ledger was the jackpot. Names, dates, payments, it was all there. I couldn't decipher everything in the moment, but I knew Victor would. The next day, I handed the photos to Victor. He let out a low whistle. "This is big, Ryan. Marcus isn't just skimming off the top, he's laundering money through shell companies. And this could land him in prison." "Good," I said coldly. "That's exactly where he belongs." But this wasn't just about Marcus. Clara had made her choices, and I wasn't letting her off the hook. I needed to confront her, but not in the way she expected. I waited until she left for one of her morning errands. Then I packed a bag, left a note that said only, "I know everything," and disappeared. I turned off my phone, left it at Victor's office, and checked into a hotel under an alias. Clara was bound to panic, and I wanted her to. She needed to feel the rug being pulled out from under her, to realize how fragile her double life truly was. I stayed away for 3 days. By the time I returned, the house was a wreck. Clara had clearly been crying. Tissues were scattered across the living room, and her makeup bag was upended on the counter. She rushed to me as soon as I walked through the door. "Ryan! Where have you been?" Her voice was shaky, desperate. "Thinking," I said flatly, brushing past her. "We need to talk," she said, grabbing my arm. I can explain." "No," I interrupted. "You can listen." I sat her down and laid it all out. The GPS tracker. The photos. The evidence from Marcus's mansion. Her face went pale as I spoke, and she began to tremble. Ryan, I'm sorry. Don't, I snapped. I don't care about your apologies. You knew exactly what you were doing, and now you're going to live with the consequences. Tears streamed down her face, but I felt nothing. Whatever love I once had for her had turned to ash. Here's how this is going to work, I continued, my voice like ice. You're going to pack your things and leave. Don't come back. Don't try to contact me. And if you think Marcus will help you, think again. He's about to lose everything. What do you mean? She whispered. I leaned in close, letting her see the cold fury in my eyes. You'll find out soon enough. Clara left that evening, and for the first time in weeks, the house felt like mine again. But my work was far from over. Now, it was time to bring down Marcus. With Clara out of the house, I felt a strange calm settle over me. The pain of her betrayal was still there, but it was overshadowed by a sense of purpose. Marcus had built his fortune on lies, manipulation, and exploitation. Now, it was his turn to pay. The evidence Victor gathered was damning. Bank transfers linked to shell companies, secret accounts offshore, and even correspondence with high-profile clients tied to illegal activities. It wasn't just shady, it was criminal. I met Victor late one evening in his office. The lights were dim, casting long shadows across the walls. What's the next step? He asked, sliding a thick folder toward me. Anonymous tips, I said, flipping through the pages. We leaked just enough to pique the interest of the right people. Victor smirked. Whistleblower? Something like that. We started with a carefully crafted letter sent to the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network. It included copies of the most incriminating documents, outlining Marcus's laundering operations in meticulous detail. We followed that with tips to a couple of journalists who specialized in exposing corruption among the wealthy elite. The fallout was swift. Within days, whispers about Marcus's business practices began circulating in the media. Articles appeared online, questioning his sudden rise to wealth and the legitimacy of his investments. Marcus, ever the arrogant one, ignored the rumblings at first. He likely thought his lawyers could bury the accusations. But then, the authorities got involved. Federal agents raided his mansion one crisp morning, the scene unfolding like something out of a movie. Clara called me in a panic, her voice trembling. Ryan, did you do this? Don't call me, I said flatly before hanging up. That evening, I watched the news with a grim satisfaction. Footage of Marcus being led out of his estate in handcuffs played on a loop. Reporters swarmed his property, speculating about the charges: money laundering, tax evasion, conspiracy. It wasn't just Marcus who suffered. The investigation uncovered his network of accomplices, unraveling years of deceit. His business associates scrambled to distance themselves, but the damage was done. And Clara? She wasn't spared from the fallout. Her affair with Marcus became public knowledge, a salacious detail the media latched onto with glee. Photos of them together, unearthed from social media and leaked anonymously, spread like wildfire. Clara's name was dragged through the mud, her reputation in tatters. She tried calling me again, leaving desperate voicemails. Ryan, please, I need your help. I made a mistake. I can't handle this on my own. I deleted every message without listening. As satisfying as it was to see Marcus's empire crumble, I wasn't done. I still had one final card to play. In the chaos of the investigation, I quietly reached out to Marcus's largest business rival, a shrewd billionaire named Whitaker. He had long wanted to buy out Marcus's holdings, but had been unable to penetrate Marcus's carefully guarded defenses. Now, those defenses were in shambles. Over a tense 2-hour meeting in Whitaker's office, I handed over key pieces of information, details about Marcus's legitimate assets that hadn't yet been frozen by the authorities. Whitaker leaned back in his chair, his expression one of mild amusement. Why are you doing this? He asked. Because he deserves to lose, I said simply. Whitaker nodded, a faint smile playing on his lips. Consider it done. Within weeks, Marcus's remaining holdings were acquired at a fraction of their value, leaving him with nothing. The man who once bragged about his invincibility was now facing bankruptcy, prison, and public disgrace. It wasn't enough to destroy Marcus's empire. I wanted him to feel what it was like to have everything taken away. Marcus's collapse sent shockwaves through every circle he'd ever touched, but the repercussions for Clara were even more personal. Without Marcus's wealth and influence to shield her, she was left exposed. Her professional life disintegrated overnight. Word of her affair spread beyond the tabloids and into the workplace. Clara's employer, a prestigious art gallery, swiftly distanced themselves, issuing a curt press release. "We uphold the highest ethical standards. Effective immediately, Clara is no longer associated with our organization." She called me, voice breaking. "Ryan, I've lost my job. They're using this scandal as an excuse. I don't know what to do." I didn't reply. Her friends began to disappear too. The ones she'd confided in during her double life wanted nothing to do with her now. They either feared being dragged into the chaos or simply couldn't stand the sight of her. She was left isolated, exactly where I wanted her. But Clara's torment didn't stop there. Weeks later, I discovered something that pushed my plan even further. In one of the financial documents Victor had uncovered, there was a payment made to Clara, an obscenely large sum, labeled as a consulting fee. It wasn't hard to deduce what it really was. Marcus had paid her to stay silent, a transactional arrangement masquerading as affection. I used this to my advantage. Through an anonymous email, I sent the detail to Clara's landlord. The landlord, already wary of the scandal surrounding her, didn't hesitate. The next day, she was served an eviction notice. "I can't believe this is happening," Clara sobbed when she showed up at my door. She looked haggard, her hair unkempt, her once bright eyes dull with despair. "I don't have anywhere to go." Her voice wavered, but I felt nothing. "You should have thought about that before you betrayed me," I said coldly. She tried to appeal to my sense of compassion. "Ryan, please. I know I messed up, but I'm still the woman you married. I still love you." "No," I snapped, stepping back and slamming the door. "The woman I married doesn't exist anymore." For the first time in weeks, I felt the weight of her presence lift. Meanwhile, Marcus wasn't faring any better. The criminal charges piled up, and his legal team hemorrhaged money trying to keep him out of prison. Every court appearance was a circus, with reporters hounding him for a statement he never gave. And then, the final blow, Marcus reached out to me. "Ryan!" His voice crackled through the phone. I could hear the exhaustion, the desperation. "I know you've been orchestrating this." I didn't deny it. "Good. That means it's working." He sighed heavily. "You've made your point. I've lost everything, my business, my reputation. But you need to stop. This is going too far." "Too far?" I repeated, my voice laced with venom. "You slept with my wife. You destroyed my marriage. You took something that wasn't yours and left me to deal with the fallout. Now you're getting a taste of what that feels like. I'll give you money," he said, his tone almost pleading. "Whatever you want." I laughed bitterly. "I don't want your money, Marcus. I want you to live in the ruin you created." I hung up, leaving him to stew in his misery. Just as I thought the storm had reached its peak, I received a letter in the mail. It was from Clara. I almost didn't open it, but curiosity got the better of me. Her handwriting was shaky, the words hurried and uneven. "Ryan, you've made it clear there's no going back for us. I accept that. But there's something you should know. Marcus wasn't the only one. I didn't want to tell you because I knew it would hurt even more, but you deserve the full truth. There was someone else before him. Someone closer to us than you realize." I read the letter twice, my hands trembling. Another betrayal? Someone else close to us? My mind raced, and a chilling thought settled over me. If Marcus wasn't the first, then who else had Clara betrayed me with? The revelation sent me spiraling. What I thought was a complete picture of her betrayal was suddenly fractured again. I couldn't ignore this new piece of the puzzle. I had to know the truth. I called Victor. We're not done, I told him, my voice tight. There's more to this. He sighed. Ryan, you've already torn her life apart. What more could there be? I don't know, I admitted. But I'm going to find out. Clara's letter haunted me. Her words replayed in my mind, each syllable cutting deeper than the last. Someone closer to us than you realize. Who could she mean? A friend? A coworker? For days I wrestled with the possibilities, but nothing made sense. Finally, I called Victor and shared the contents of the letter. Any thoughts? I asked, my voice strained. Victor sighed. If she's being truthful, it has to be someone with direct access to your life, your house, your routines. Someone you wouldn't suspect. The thought made my stomach turn. If there was someone else, they were hiding in plain sight. Victor dove back into his research, focusing on Clara's communications and social connections. Meanwhile, I began to scrutinize my own life. Every interaction, every friendship, every memory was re-examined through the lens of betrayal. Then, one afternoon, Victor called me. Ryan, I found something, he said. His tone was cautious, like he knew the news would hit hard. There are text exchanges between Clara and your cousin Greg. My blood ran cold. Greg and I had grown up together, practically brothers. He'd always been there, holidays, birthdays, family barbecues. He was the one I turned to when things got tough. To think he could betray me like this, it didn't seem possible. I'm sending you the screenshots, Victor said. But brace yourself. It's bad. When the messages came through, I felt the ground shift beneath me. The texts were explicit, their tone dripping with deceit. Greg hadn't just been close to Clara, he had been her first affair. The messages revealed a relationship that spanned months, possibly years, before she moved on to Marcus. My hands shook as I read their conversations. Clara had confided in Greg about our marriage, spinning tales of dissatisfaction and neglect. And Greg, ever the opportunist, had taken full advantage. The betrayal cut deeper than anything Marcus had done. Greg wasn't just a predator, he was family. I didn't hesitate. I drove to Greg's house that evening, my chest tight with rage. When he opened the door, his face lit up in surprise. Ryan! What's up, man? Without a word, I shoved him back into the house, slamming the door behind me. You think I don't know? I growled. His confusion shifted to panic. No what? What are you talking about? I pulled out my phone and thrust the screenshots in his face. He paled instantly, stumbling back into a chair. Ryan, I can explain. Explain? I interrupted, my voice rising. Explain how you slept with my wife? How you stabbed me in the back? Go ahead, Greg, make me understand. He stammered, his words tumbling over each other in a pathetic attempt to justify the unjustifiable. It wasn't like that. She came to me, man. She said you were distant, that she needed someone to talk to. I didn't mean for it to happen. I lunged at him, grabbing him by the collar. You didn't mean for it to happen? I spat. You betrayed me, Greg. You didn't just cross a line, you obliterated it. He looked away, shame etched across his face. I'm sorry, Ryan. I know I screwed up. I wasn't thinking. Wasn't thinking? I let go of him, disgusted. You've ruined everything. You, Clara, and Marcus, you've all taken something from me that I can never get back. He sat there, silent, as I loomed over him. I wanted to hit him, to unleash all the anger boiling inside me, but I held back. You're dead to me, I said finally, my voice cold and steady. Don't come to family gatherings. Don't call me. Don't even think about me. As far as I'm concerned, you don't exist. I left without waiting for a response. The revelation about Greg pushed me over the edge. I had already destroyed Marcus's empire and dismantled Clara's life, but now, I wanted something more. I wanted a legacy of my own, something untouchable, something they could never take from me. I decided to use the remnants of Marcus's business connections against him. The shell companies, the clients, the assets that hadn't yet been frozen, I began acquiring them one by one, using Whitaker's resources and my own cunning to gain control. If Marcus thought he was untouchable, he was about to learn otherwise. Weeks later, I stood in the boardroom of Marcus's former company, now under my ownership. The irony wasn't lost on me. What he had built through deceit, I would rebuild with integrity. As I looked out over the city skyline, I felt a sense of closure. Marcus was ruined, Clara was gone, and Greg was nothing more than a memory. But the cost of my revenge was steep. I had lost more than I'd gained: trust, innocence, and a version of myself I could never reclaim. Still, as I left the boardroom that day, I knew one thing for certain: they would never forget what I had done. Marcus's downfall had been swift and merciless. His empire was in ruins, his reputation irreparably tarnished, and his once loyal allies had abandoned him. Yet, even in his darkest hour, he wasn't ready to give up. 2 months after his arrest, I received an unexpected call from a private number. Against my better judgment, I answered. "Ryan." His voice was weaker than I remembered, the arrogance stripped away, leaving behind a hollow echo of the man he once was. "Marcus," I replied coldly. "I need your help," he said after a moment of silence. I couldn't help but laugh. "You're joking. I know I've made mistakes," he continued, ignoring my derision. "But you've destroyed everything. My business, my name, everything I built. I'm left with nothing." "That's the point," I snapped. "You took what wasn't yours, and now you're paying the price." "You've made your point," he said, desperation creeping into his tone. "But we're family, Ryan. Blood. Can't you see what this is doing to all of us?" "Family?" I hissed. "You stopped being family the moment you decided my wife was fair game." There was a long pause before he spoke again, quieter this time. "I have something you'll want to see." "What could you possibly have that would interest me?" "Clara," he said simply. My grip tightened on the phone. "What about her?" "There's more to the story than you realize," he said, his voice gaining a hint of its old swagger. "If you want the truth, the full truth, you'll meet me." I didn't respond immediately. I hated the idea of giving Marcus even an ounce of power over me, but the curiosity was overwhelming. I needed to know if this was another one of his games or if he genuinely had something that would change everything. "Fine," I said finally. "Where?" We met at a dingy cafe on the outskirts of town. Marcus looked like a shadow of his former self, his once pristine suit replaced by rumpled clothes, his hair unkempt, his eyes hollow. He slid an envelope across the table without saying a word. I hesitated before opening it. Inside were photographs, grainy but unmistakable. Clara wasn't just involved with Marcus and Greg. There were others. 3 other men, to be exact. The photos showed her at various locations: a hotel lobby, a parked car, a private party. "You're lying," I said, though my voice lacked conviction. Marcus smirked, the old arrogance flickering back. "Why would I lie now? What do I have to gain?" He leaned forward, his voice low and conspiratorial. "Clara wasn't a victim. She wasn't coerced. She chose this, Ryan. Every affair, every betrayal, she did it because she wanted to." I stared at the photos, my mind reeling. Had I been blind to who Clara really was all along? Marcus leaned back, a hint of satisfaction in his eyes. "You thought destroying me would fix everything. But the truth is, you've been fighting the wrong battle. The real enemy was in your bed the entire time." I didn't respond. I simply stood, leaving the photos on the table as I walked out. Marcus's words gnawed at me for days. I couldn't shake the image of Clara's face in those photos, the carefree smile she wore while betraying me again and again. Finally, I confronted her. I found her at a rundown motel, where she had been staying since her eviction. She looked startled when she saw me, her disheveled appearance a stark contrast to the polished woman I once knew. "What are you doing here?" she asked cautiously. I threw the envelope onto the table between us. "You tell me," Her face went pale as she flipped through the photos. Ryan, I can explain. Don't, I interrupted, my voice cold. I've heard enough lies to last a lifetime. She sank into a chair, her hands trembling. I didn't mean for any of this to happen, she said weakly. Stop pretending to be the victim. I snapped. Marcus told me everything. You didn't just betray me, you destroyed us. Tears streamed down her face, but I felt nothing. Whatever connection we once had was long gone. This is the last time we'll ever speak, I said, turning to leave. You made your choices. Now live with them. As I walked out of that motel, I felt a strange sense of closure. Clara was no longer my concern. What came next was my choice alone. Leaving Clara behind felt like shedding a heavy weight. For the first time in months, I could breathe. But my journey wasn't over. Revenge had consumed me, but now I needed to find something worth living for, something to replace the emptiness left in its wake. The remnants of Marcus's former empire provided an unexpected opportunity. I'd taken control of key assets, stripped of their corruption, and was rebuilding them into legitimate enterprises. Real estate holdings, technology investments, and even a philanthropic branch, Marcus's legacy would become the antithesis of everything he stood for. My lawyer, Catherine, a sharp and no-nonsense woman, helped steer the transformation. During one of our meetings, she remarked, "You're turning this into something remarkable, Ryan." "But why? What drives you?" "Because they don't get to win," I said simply. "Marcus, Clara, they tried to destroy me. But I'm still standing." For weeks, I poured myself into this work, building not just a business but a life I could be proud of. My name, once overshadowed by Marcus's, began to rise in its own right. One day, while reviewing contracts in my office, I received an unexpected visitor, Greg. I almost didn't let him in, but curiosity won out. He looked worse for wear, his once confident demeanor replaced by visible shame. "I'm not here to make excuses," he began, his voice low. "I just wanted to apologize. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I needed to say it." I leaned back in my chair studying him. "Why now?" "Because I've lost everything," he admitted. "My family doesn't talk to me. My career's in shambles. And it's all my fault." His sincerity caught me off guard. For a moment, I considered dismissing him, but then a thought struck me. "You want to make things right?" I asked. He nodded fervently. "I'll do anything." I handed him a folder containing a list of remaining loose ends from Marcus's network, associates who had yet to face consequences for their roles in his schemes. "Help me take them down," I said. "Prove you're more than the mistakes you've made." Greg's eyes widened, but he didn't hesitate. "I'll do it." With Greg's help, we began dismantling the final vestiges of Marcus's influence. He provided insider knowledge of Marcus's operations, information I used to tip off investigators and the media. One by one, the remaining players fell. Executives resigned under pressure, fraudulent deals unraveled, and corrupt officials faced public scrutiny. Through it all, Greg worked tirelessly, as if trying to redeem himself. While I couldn't bring myself to fully trust him, his actions spoke louder than his words. When the last of Marcus's associates was exposed, I called Greg into my office. "You've done your part," I said. "You can go now." He hesitated, then stood. "Thank you, Ryan, for giving me a chance to make amends." I didn't respond. His debt to me was paid, but the wounds he'd inflicted would never fully heal. Months passed, and life began to take on a new rhythm. My rebuilt businesses flourished, providing opportunities for others and erasing the stain of Marcus's corruption. But it wasn't just about success. I had begun to reconnect with old friends, rebuild relationships I'd neglected during my marriage. Slowly, the pieces of my life started to come together. One evening, as I stood on the balcony of my new office, overlooking the city skyline, I felt a sense of peace. The anger that had fueled me for so long was gone, replaced by a quiet determination. I didn't need revenge anymore. I had won. Or so I thought. A letter arrived the next morning, addressed in Clara's handwriting. Against my better judgment, I opened it. Ryan, you think it's over, but it's not. There are things you don't know, about Marcus, about me, about what really happened. If you want the truth, meet me at the old cabin. The cabin. The one Marcus used for his illicit dealings. I debated ignoring it, but something about her words pulled at me. Was this another manipulation? Or was there more to the story than I realized? As I stared at the letter, I knew I had a choice to make. The old cabin sat deep in the woods, far from prying eyes. It had once been a place where Marcus conducted his most clandestine affairs, a sanctuary for secrets and schemes. Now, it would be the site of the final chapter of my story with Clara. I arrived at dusk, the sky streaked with ominous shades of orange and gray. The cabin looked abandoned, its once pristine exterior weathered and worn. As I stepped out of the car, a cold wind rustled through the trees, carrying with it a sense of foreboding. Clara was waiting inside. She stood near the fireplace, her arms wrapped around herself as if trying to ward off the chill. She looked different, tired, broken, a shadow of the woman I once knew. "You came," she said softly, her voice barely audible over the creaking of the wooden floorboards. "I almost didn't," I replied, my tone cold. "But you said there was more I needed to know." She gestured toward a table in the center of the room, where a small stack of documents lay. "It's all there. The truth about Marcus. About what he did to me, and to others." I approached the table cautiously, picking up the first document. It was a handwritten letter from Clara, dated years ago. In it, she detailed how Marcus had manipulated her, using his wealth and charm to draw her in. "I was weak," she admitted, her voice trembling. "I let myself be pulled into his world. But it wasn't just me, Ryan. He preyed on so many women, using their vulnerabilities against them. He trapped them." The next document was a list of names, women who had been involved with Marcus. Some were familiar, others not. Each name was accompanied by notes about how Marcus had exploited them: financial control, blackmail, threats. "This doesn't excuse what you did," I said, my anger bubbling beneath the surface. "I know," Clara replied, tears streaming down her face. "But you need to understand. I was one of his victims too. He made sure I couldn't leave. Every time I tried, he threatened to ruin me." I stared at her, trying to reconcile her words with the woman who had betrayed me. Was she lying? Manipulating me again? Or was this the truth? Before I could respond, the sound of tires crunching on gravel broke the tense silence. I turned toward the window and saw headlights approaching. "Who else knows we're here?" I demanded. "No one," Clara said, panic flashing in her eyes. The car came to a stop, and the driver stepped out. It was Marcus. He entered the cabin like he owned the place, his once commanding presence now diminished but still dangerous. His eyes flicked between me and Clara, a sneer forming on his lips. "Well, isn't this cozy?" he drawled. "The two of you, playing detective. What are you doing here, Marcus?" I asked, my voice steady. He ignored me, turning his attention to Clara. "I warned you, didn't I? You couldn't leave well enough alone." "You don't scare me anymore," Clara said, though her voice wavered. Marcus laughed, the sound harsh and bitter. "You should be scared, Clara. Both of you should." He reached into his coat pocket, and for a moment, I thought he might be armed. But instead, he pulled out a folder and threw it onto the table. "You want the truth?" he sneered. "Here it is. Every deal, every secret, every lie I ever told. You think you've won, Ryan? You think you've destroyed me? You have no idea what you've unleashed." I opened the folder, my hands trembling. It was a dossier of incriminating evidence, not just against Marcus but against powerful figures he had worked with over the years. Politicians, business moguls, even law enforcement officials. "This isn't just about me," Marcus continued. "You've stirred up a hornet's nest, and now everyone involved is coming for blood. You think you're safe? You're not." Clara looked at me, fear etched across her face. "What do we do?" I didn't answer immediately. My mind was racing, weighing the risks and the possibilities. Marcus wasn't bluffing. The evidence in the folder was explosive, enough to bring down not just him but an entire network of corruption. Finally, I turned to Marcus. "You've lost everything," I said. "Your empire, your reputation, it's all gone. And now you're desperate." "Maybe," he admitted, his smile chilling. "But if I go down, I'm taking everyone with me. Including you." I glanced at Clara. "Get out of here," I said quietly. "What?" she asked, her voice shaking. "No," I repeated. She hesitated, then nodded, rushing out the door. Marcus didn't try to stop her. Once we were alone, I stepped closer to him. "You think you can scare me into backing down? I think you don't realize what you're up against," he replied. I met his gaze, my anger simmering. "You underestimated me once, Marcus. Don't make that mistake again." As I left the cabin, dossier in hand, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over. Marcus's words echoed in my mind, a chilling reminder that some battles don't end cleanly. When I reached my car, I found a note tucked under the windshield wiper. It was written in Marcus's handwriting. "This is bigger than you think. Be careful, or you'll lose more than you bargained for." Marcus's cryptic note lingered in my mind, a warning I couldn't ignore. As much as I wanted to believe I had emerged victorious, his words hinted at a larger, more insidious threat, one that extended beyond him, beyond Clara, and into the shadows of power and corruption he had operated within. I spent the next few days combing through the dossier Marcus had left behind. The names, dates, and transactions painted a damning picture of a network that thrived on greed and secrecy. Politicians, CEOs, and law enforcement officers were all entangled in a web of mutual deceit. Marcus had been a key player, but he wasn't the architect. And now, with Marcus out of the picture, someone else would be looking to clean up loose ends. Victor, my trusted investigator, confirmed my fears. "Ryan, this isn't just about exposing a criminal. You've rattled a lot of cages. People are going to want answers, or silence." I clenched my fists, anger and frustration swirling in my chest. "What are you saying? That I back down?" "No," Victor said firmly. "I'm saying you need to be smart. If you push this any further, you'll be putting a target on your back." But backing down wasn't an option. One evening, while reviewing the dossier again, I noticed something I had overlooked, a recurring name tied to multiple transactions, J.T. Whitaker. The very billionaire who had helped me dismantle Marcus's legitimate assets was also implicated in his illicit dealings. Whitaker had positioned himself as an ally, eager to help me destroy Marcus, but now it was clear he had his own agenda. By assisting me, he hadn't been seeking justice, he had been eliminating a competitor. The realization hit like a punch to the gut. I had unwittingly played into Whitaker's hands, helping him consolidate power while believing I was doing the right thing. Fueled by a renewed sense of betrayal, I dug deeper into Whitaker's connections. What I found was staggering. He wasn't just complicit, he was orchestrating a larger scheme, leveraging Marcus's downfall to expand his influence. Armed with this knowledge, I reached out to an investigative journalist who had covered Marcus's arrest. She was skeptical at first but quickly changed her tune when I showed her the evidence tying Whitaker to the network. "This is explosive," she said, her eyes wide as she scanned the documents. "But you're playing a dangerous game, Ryan." "I've been in danger since the day I uncovered Marcus's secrets," I replied. "This needs to come out." Together, we developed a plan to release the story in waves, starting with Whitaker's most obvious transgressions and building to the full extent of his crimes. It was a calculated move, designed to keep him on the defensive and prevent him from retaliating too quickly. The exposé hit like a bombshell. Whitaker's empire, once untouchable, began to crumble under the weight of public scrutiny. Investors pulled out, clients distanced themselves, and his name became synonymous with corruption. But Whitaker didn't go down without a fight. One evening, I received a call from an unknown number. The voice on the other end was cold and precise. "You've made a powerful enemy, Ryan. Tell Whitaker I'm not afraid of him," I replied. You should be, the voice said before the line went dead. It was a clear message: back off or face the consequences. But I had come too far to stop now. As Whitaker's empire continued to unravel, I received a package at my office. Inside was a single piece of paper, a document detailing a financial account in my name. It claimed that I had been receiving payments from Marcus during his schemes. It was a blatant attempt to frame me, to drag my name into the muck. But Whitaker had underestimated me. I handed the document to Victor, who quickly traced its origin to a forgery ring tied to one of Whitaker's subsidiaries. The journalist exposed the scheme in her next article, turning the tide even further against him. Whitaker's threats escalated, but I remained resolute. Each step brought me closer to dismantling the last remnants of his influence. In the end, Whitaker fell just as Marcus had. His assets were seized, his reputation destroyed, and his power stripped away. The network of corruption was exposed, leaving its members scrambling to cover their tracks. As for Clara, she disappeared from my life entirely. I heard rumors that she had moved to another state, trying to rebuild, but I had no interest in following her story. The battle had cost me dearly: trust, peace, and a piece of myself I could never recover. But as I stood in my office one evening, staring out at the city below, I felt a sense of closure. I had won. Not just against Marcus, Clara, or Whitaker, but against the darkness that had threatened to consume me. And for the first time in a long time, I allowed myself to hope. The war was over. Or so I thought.